Lacey, Washington is a rural outpost of Olympia, an unlikely setting for a scandal that would land on the cover of the New Yorker magazine for 2 months running. Even more unlikely was the family at the center of it all.
County, a former deputy.
A civil deputy for Thurston County.
Continue our investigation.
The announcement electrified Olympia. The top deputy sheriff, Paul Ingram, pillar of church and community, arrested for raping his 2 daughters.
Paul Ingram is serving a 20-year sentence in a Delaware state prison. About as far from Olympia, Washington, on the southern edge of Puget Sound as one could get. But then Ingram couldn't serve time in a Washington prison. He'd been a police officer there for 16 years.
If you've lived in Thurston County since 1988, you probably would not identify East Olympia as Lacey, and you probably don't remember our community being electrified by the Ingram case. Until recently, all I remembered was that it had been headline news in the Olympian day after day. I'm Carol Burns. I live here in the Olympia area. The Ingram case has attracted national attention, but it's not being discussed here in our community. I think it's important to take a closer look. In November of 1988, the Olympian reported that Paul Ingram had been arrested for investigation of second-degree rape. Ingram had been an employee of the Thurston County Sheriff's Office for 16 years and was a leader in the Thurston County Republican Party. A few days later, 2 other men, Jim Raby and Ray Risch, were also arrested. Because the Olympian does not give the names of rape victims, I didn't know at that time that the 2 young women bringing the charges were Paul Ingram's daughters, Erica, who was 22 years old, and Julie, who was 18. I remember feeling disgusted when it was revealed that Jim Raby had been the sex crimes investigator for Thurston County. When additional victims came forward, it confirmed my general impression that the accused men were using their authority as police officers to intimidate their victims. In fact, at this point in mid-January, the new accuser was Paul Ingram's wife, Sandy. Testimony from Ingram's 2 sons, Paul Jr., who was 23, and Chad, who was 20, also became part of this story. The offenses were described as occurring in the Ingram home over a 14-year period, but since I was only glancing at these stories, I still didn't guess that the victims were all members of the Ingram family. The information that some charges involved satanic rituals was not revealed until the attorneys for Jim Raby and Ray Risch were allowed to interview the accusers. Raby's attorney, Sax Rogers, was quoted as saying, "It's beyond any known human behavior I've ever heard of. I've never heard of it coming out of the mouth of a human being." Authors who later wrote about this case for national publications stated that by this time our community was on the verge of hysteria. In fact, no one I knew was paying very much attention. Scanning through these microfilms, I spotted only 2 letters to the editor. Both of those criticized the Olympian for their reporting of the case. Nowhere in their coverage were there any modifying phrases to remind readers that these men were only accused and had not been proven guilty. Eventually, Paul Ingram pleaded guilty, and the charges against Jim Raby and Ray Risch were dropped. The reason given was that the victims were too traumatized to testify. On the Geraldo show this same week, an ex-FBI agent claimed that the bodies of thousands of people sacrificed in satanic rituals were buried in Mason County. Mason County residents were noticeably unruffled. The Ingram case disappeared from the pages of the Olympian for about 8 months. Then, in January of 1990, it was reported that Ingram had attempted to withdraw his guilty plea and was saying that the charges against Jim Raby and Ray Risch were also untrue. Ingram claimed his guilty plea was improper because of coercive interrogation techniques. The judge denied Ingram's motion, ruling that the guilty plea had been given voluntarily. Ingram was sentenced to 20 years in prison. At the same time, Thurston County Sheriff Gary Edwards asserted that their investigation into the case would continue. According to the Olympian, Undersheriff Neil McClanahan emphasized that although prosecutors were ready to refile the charges against Jim Raby and Ray Risch, the victims were not yet strong enough to testify. The Sheriff's Department asked for $750,000 from the state legislature to reopen the investigation. The legislature did not grant the money. What first got my attention was this article in Mother Jones magazine in July 1991. Then there was an article in the New Yorker magazine, which was expanded and published in book form.
The story now is the subject of a new book called Remembering Satan. It's written by journalist Lawrence Wright, who, we might add, just received an award from Northwestern University for his reporting on this case in the New Yorker magazine. Larry, good morning. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you again.
After really looking carefully at this whole case, you're convinced that none of this satanic ritual abuse ever took place?
There's absolutely no evidence that it did. And the more I asked about the evidence, the less that was produced. This case has been held up as an example all over the country that satanic ritual abuse is real. And that's what drew me to it in the first place. I thought, if it is real, I'd like to find out about it. And yet the deeper I explored the case, the less there seemed to be of it.
If the memories recovered from the Ingram family are true, scores of murders have been committed by a cult that's never been brought to justice. Dangerous people are still at large in Thurston County. But what if the memories aren't true?
The memories. Just what are the memories referred to here? They're contained in the public record of interrogation sessions with members of the Ingram family between November 1988 and May 1989. Taken as a whole, they cannot be true. No one today who has thoroughly examined the record of this case believes that all of these events actually happened just as they were described. During this program, you will hear audio tapes from some of these sessions. You will probably agree that many statements are contradictory or simply impossible. People who disagree about the outcome of this case differ only in their explanations for why the Ingram family told these unlikely stories. People who believe that Ingram was rightfully sentenced to prison believe that the victims were confused and irrational because of the psychological trauma caused by years of brutal sexual abuse. They believe that Paul Ingram had some kind of motive for deliberately misleading investigators with his stories. This is the unofficial position of the Thurston County Prosecutor's Office.
Gary Tabor is the deputy prosecutor who led the case against Ingram. Tabor says one should not be taken in by Ingram's wild confessions.
Might it be to a person's advantage, if they're accused of a very heinous crime, to try to convolute and confuse the whole issue by telling some way-out things?
A growing number of people examining this case believe that Paul Ingram did not abuse his daughters and that none of the alleged crimes ever occurred. There is a small organization working on Ingram's behalf.
I briefly knew Paul back in the early 80s. I was a volunteer for Olympia Police Department. I was an explorer there for 3.5 years. And I briefly worked with him a few times. I didn't know him personally. When all the Ingram case developed, I was living in Spokane, Washington, and I'd briefly come back to Spokane or Olympia to visit my family and friends, and all I knew about the case is what I read in the newspapers. And to my knowledge, he was guilty, he confessed, and that's all I knew about it. It wasn't until I went to California and visited with some friends down there, and the Ingram case got brought up, and I argued with them that he in fact was guilty. They challenged me to look into the case. I was shocked at what I found out. I spent basically 3 years researching the Ingram case and felt that there was a great injustice here and felt compelled to do something and started an organization to try and help him out.
But people who believe that none of these alleged crimes ever happened have a hard time explaining why these strange tales were told. Which of them were deliberate lies? Which of them were delusions? Were the investigators sincerely seeking the truth, or did they have other motives, such as personal vendettas? Judge Robert Peterson, who ruled against Ingram's motion to change his plea, dismissed these questions entirely by choosing to disregard most of the record of this case. He commented specifically that he did not like some of the interrogations and that descriptions of the satanic activities were gross exaggerations. The judge cited the record of November 28, day one, the day that Ingram was arrested. The case here, he states, is rape of the two women in 1988, and that's all the charges are, and I just find that he did it. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office spent $500,000 investigating this case. Despite that, Sheriff Gary Edwards talks about it now as if it were open and shut on that first day.
After
10 minutes or less, he initially said yes. And that threw me for a loop. I was kind of probably hoping that he wouldn't even say that.
Let's return to that first day that Paul Ingram was arrested. He already knew that his daughters had accused him. He arrived at work as usual at the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Edwards summoned him into his office and, according to the record, advised Ingram that there was a problem. Paul acknowledged what the sheriff said by saying yes and nodding his head. He went on to say, "I know if this did happen, we need to take care of it. There may be a dark side of me that I don't know about." Here's how Ingram himself described that day and the events leading up to it. You will hear an audio recording that was made as he talked to Bellevue therapist Bill Lennon, who was hired to be a personal counselor. Ingram had already been in custody for about a month when this first meeting with Dr. Lennon took place.
And I knew I could get an attorney that would have told me not to talk, to do those kind of things, but I felt that these things needed to come out, and I'd rather have an attorney that gave me Christian advice rather than just try and get me off. There's no way I want to put my kids through any kind of a trial. As emotional as this is, it's hard for them to get the information out and to ever testify.
Paul, what do you know that you did? What do you know that you have to deal with?
Okay, logically, and this is dealing with my conscious mind, I know that I have had incest or rape or sodomy with my two daughters and my two sons. When I get into the unconscious, I can't see myself doing that. I can't put faces on my kids. I can identify them, but I cannot put the picture of their face in that situation.
How do you know that you did these things? You said, I know that I had incest, rape, sodomy with my two daughters, my two sons.
Because they've said that it happened. And I know that my kids aren't lying about that. So logically, I know that's happened because the kids.
And how do you know they've said that it happened? How did you get that information?
I got it, well, the week before Thanksgiving, we were getting ready to go on vacation, and my oldest daughter wanted to meet with my wife. My daughter was with another woman, and they met with my wife on Sunday night and told her that I had been abusing her since she was 5 years old. Sandy came home and accused me of that, and I said, hey, I don't touch these girls, you know. In my mind, I knew that we weren't close. My kids, for a number of years, and I have not been able to get close to them. I have a hard time hugging them. They have a hard time hugging me, that kind of thing. And we can't have a real in-depth discussion. But I said, hey, there's no way. And consciously, I knew that nothing had happened. And then the next morning, Sandy, my wife...
Which daughter said that?
This was Erica. She's 20...
I better get the players here. Yeah. Erica?
Erica's 22. She was born in 1965. Julie is 18, and Chad is 20, and Paul Jr. is 23. And then we have a 9-year-old son, Mark, and so far they've talked to him, and we're just believing that he hasn't been involved, but I'm prepared for the worst, that he could be somehow or another. But I'm a lot closer to Mark than any of the other kids.
Erica came...
She and met Sandy and accused me of abusing her since she was 5 years old. And I denied it, of course. And then the next morning, Sandy called Julie early because they both moved out of the house. Erica moved out in September and Julie in October. And that's another thing that told me that there were problems here. There's a lot of logical things that have happened over the years that have led me to believe that these things have happened, that they're not lying. And then the kids don't lie. They just don't do that. But
do you?
Consciously, no. But unconsciously, I have to. If you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Consciously, I look at myself as a very moral person, a Christian, don't lie, would go out of my way. I've been a police officer for 17 years, and I'd get on the stand if I couldn't remember something, I'd say it, rather than try and...
What was your function as a police officer?
I started out as a deputy, and I was I was number 4 in the department here. I had an appointed position.
Which was?
Chief Civil Deputy. So, and that's another thing that makes it so hard. I was Chief Civil Deputy here, and also the chairman for the Republican Party, so there's a lot of press and a lot of publicity on all this. It makes it very difficult. Just to give you some background, I was raised Roman Catholic, attended a seminary for 3 years. I got married when I was 20. My wife also was Catholic, and we moved over here in '69. I went to church for the first 4 or 5 years.
What church?
It was Sacred Heart out here in Lacey. And then I just gave it up. I just quit going because I wasn't getting anything out of it. And Sandy continued to go, and then she started going to Evergreen Christian Center, and then in 1975, I don't know how long she'd gone there before I did, but I accepted the Lord, and we were baptized as a family, I think, in November.
That's where you're still?
No, we're going to Living Water now, which is a Foursquare church.
God is completely and eternally committed, absolutely committed to turning you and I from our sinful nature into Christ-like people. He's committed to that. And because he is going to constantly be bringing things into our lives that are knocking off the stuff that doesn't look like Jesus. And he can use difficult times and he can use really good times to do that.
And so on Monday morning, Paul went to his work at the Thurston County Sheriff's Department, filled with fear and confusion, but trusting that God had a plan and a purpose to make him a better father and a better Christian.
Okay. Well,
Here's Dan.
Carol Burns and Dan's here. Dan, go get on the phone, Dan.
Basically, let me tell you what's going on here. We've got Carol Burns here with the videotape on. We've got a microphone to the telephone so that the conversation can be heard two ways. You should see the setup here. It's pretty primitive, but I think it's going to work. How were you feeling when you first walked in? When you knew the accusations, what were happening when you walked in the day you were arrested?
Well, of course, everything was in turmoil that day, especially with me.
Right.
And then, of course, these people that I knew and trusted were the ones that were now my accusers. And if I, when I said, well, this stuff never happened, they said, oh, but it did, the girls wouldn't lie about something like this.
I didn't want to think they were lying. I thought, well, I must have hidden something. Something happened, and I just didn't want to look at it. It was so horrendous, I didn't want to look at it.
When I went in with the detectives, it was the same, with them. They were saying, well, this happened, we know it happened, and the reason you don't remember it is because you're in denial.
And so Joe Vukic, the detective, said, look, Paul, once you admit that it's happened, then you'll see all this stuff. This happens all the time with people that are involved in this type of thing.
I said, well, okay. I just, gave up and said, if that's what it takes, then I'll admit that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Pastor John Brayton said the same thing.
What was he telling you?
Well, just that, these things, that what they were telling me about denial was correct. And I don't remember if that's when he started the 20% good, 80% evil bit, or if that was the next day.
Now, what do you mean by that?
That was what he was saying. He said, I see what's happening here. He says, you're 20% good and 80% evil, and it's the 20% is what you see, and the 80% is what you don't see. That's what you hide.
Mm-hmm.
And he going off on this, and he told Sandy the same thing.
So I thought, okay. So that's what I did. Stupid, and I didn't want an attorney. I thought, no, I want the truth. I don't want an attorney. So I said, okay, I did it.
The morning after the arrest, Tacoma psychologist Dr. Richard Peterson met with Ingram to conduct a safe-to-be-at-large evaluation. The psychologist suggested that Ingram himself might have been abused as a child, and that this had resulted in multiple personality disorder. The Paul Ingram, who seemed to be an outstanding citizen in the everyday world, might have no awareness or memory of the other Paul Ingram who abused his children. Dr. Peterson agreed to remain for a taped interrogation session that afternoon. As the tape is turned on, we hear Ingram appealing to Dr. Peterson to help him convince the detectives that he is trying to cooperate.
I really want you to believe that I'm telling you the truth, that consciously, I'm not trying to hide anything. If I could get anything out, I'd certainly tell you.
I mean, I think maybe a difficulty that you might be having, Paul, is you've been a police officer for what, 16, 17 years?
Yeah.
You're a pretty sharp, smart individual, and as cops, we have a very factual, very punctual, very data-minded frame of reference, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Only a week ago, Detectives Brian Schoening and Joe Vukic had been Paul Ingram's subordinates in the Thurston County Sheriff's Department.
Makes it hard for us, at least, to comprehend that you can't recall this, because I'll bet you could go back and take a citation you wrote 10 years ago, just look at the citation, maybe a couple notes on the back of it. You'd remember pretty much what happened that day.
Yeah, you're probably right. In a lot of cases, I could do that.
And that's what confuses me about this. I mean, what happened with Julie happened just last month. It's very real, it's very recent. Granted, it's very hard to talk about.
That's the key. They're hard to talk about. I don't believe it's not there, Paul.
Okay, I believe it's there, but
no,
I can't see it. I can't see it yet.
It's funny enough, they used to drink quite a bit. They used to have quite an appetite for beer.
What I would do, and I forget why we did it, but we got an old refrigerator, put a keg of beer, and we used to have poker parties at the house. And I did like to come home after I'd been working swing shift and sit down and have one, maybe two beers. I'd never drank much more than that. Sometimes if we played poker, I would, but...
So the poker buddies that you played with would be who? Friends from the department? Or
yeah, most of them were friends from the department or friends of theirs. We'd get, I don't know, 5 or 8 guys together.
Anybody ever go up to see the kids? And there's a reason I asked that.
I just can't think of anything, Larry.
Well, the reason I asked, Paul, is because Julie told me about a time or two where, when there was a poker party, she was molested.
Was I aware that she was molested by the other person?
That's the indication that she thinks she might have been watching. Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you before. We got to talk about this. This isn't something we can just keep saying it's dark in there and you can't find it. So who else was involved with your daughter as far as sexually up there?
Yes.
She remembers being somebody tying her up on the bed and 2 people at least taking turns with her while somebody else watched, probably you.
I am just trying to think. I'm trying to get into that part of...
Yeah, and she's real intimidated and she's in real fear right now because that person's still out on the street. That person is some friend of yours that worked or works for this department. Apparently it's somebody stuck close to you, Paul.
See, Paul, she remembers this.
Well, just hang on a minute.
Okay.
Jim Raby played poker with us. Jim and I have been fairly close.
Is Jim the person she's talking about?
Don't put words in my mouth. You know, I'm really trying to figure out who's been close.
So who are you covering for, Paul?
I was close to Gary Edwards, not the sheriff Gary Edwards. We had a reserve by the name of Gary Edwards, and he and his wife lived in a trailer next to us on 87th for a while until they built another house. They built there just before we moved.
Talking about probably 74, 5, 6, somewhere along in there when this would occur.
That's about the time that Gary and I would have palled around together.
Can you picture Gary doing this to your daughter?
I can't picture it, but he and I did spend a lot of time together. We were close for a couple of years, and a fellow by the name of Ray Risch, he's a mechanic for the State Patrol. We did a lot of things together.
Okay, we talked about somebody having, maybe holding something over you that they know. How about, did somebody pay you or do you some kind of favors so they could do this to your daughter?
I don't have a picture of it.
Paul.
Well, you know, I'm trying to tell you the truth.
Before your conversion to Christianity, were you ever involved in any kind of black magic?
At one time I read a little bit of astrology, but, you know, like you're in the paper, read your, what do you call that?
Horoscope.
Horoscope. Nothing other than that.
Not been anything sacrilegious before you became religious?
I don't know what you're driving at.
The Satan cult kind of a thing?
No.
Sacrifices, that kind of stuff.
You're involved in, like, even with animal sacrifices in any way, shape?
No. I remember once on Halloween we put a cat in a sack and tied it on a telephone pole.
Well, how can you be... Again, convince me. You're so positive about things like that, and then you can't be positive about anything else.
I don't know. There's no picture.
You'd have to know, Paul.
I don't know.
one of the things that would help you, Paul, is if you stop asking for help and just let yourself sit back and not try to think about anything. Just let yourself go and relax. No one's going to hurt you. No one can help. Just relax. Try not to think about anything. You ask yourself, what it is you need to do. The answer will come. But I don't think you give it any more energy. And any father who wants to battle like it, let's not throw it to you.
Well, why don't you tell us what happened to Julie, Paul?
Just don't find it. Up to you, Paul.
What happened with that poker game?
I see Julie lying on the floor on the sheet. Her hands are tied to her feet. She's on her stomach. I'm standing there looking at her. Somebody else is on my left.
Who is that?
But
standing right next to you, Paul. All you have to do is just look to your left, and there he is.
The effect of Dr. Peterson's relaxation exercise on Ingram is no more startling than the effect it has on Detectives Schoening and Vukic. They quickly discard their tough, straightforward questioning and begin mimicking Dr. Peterson's gentle, guided visualizations.
He's a friend of yours?
I'm trying to get a face.
How's he built, Paul?
He's big. He's husky.
Does he have any jewelry on?
Did I miss it?
He may have a watch on his right hand.
What time did he say?
2 o'clock.
Is somebody taking pictures?
Oh, pictures. Is there somebody off to the right of me? It's possible. Let me look. Right there. I see a camera.
Who's got the pictures, Paul?
I see a camera.
Who's taking the pictures? Who's got them?
I don't know. I don't see a person. Okay, I've backed away from Jim. I'm looking at this person. The person that I think I see is Ray Risch. Oh gosh, I don't know what else I see. I'm kind of losing it here.
Does something else happen to Julie?
Okay, let's go back.
She's tied. She's laying on her side.
She's laying on her side. I think I see oral sex. I think it's me. Another person there. I don't see a face. I just see a figure. It's like a stick figure.
Who is it?
Paul, I've just been ordered that we have to take you to arraignment right now.
Black and red. Black and red. I can't get a face. Give me a face, Lord. Please, Jesus, give me a face.
Hurry up, Paul. Time is running out.
Lord, give me a face. A face.
Who is it?
We gotta go. We've been ordered, honestly.
I'm sorry.
Following the arraignment, the same group of people returned to the interrogation room, joined for the first time by Ingram's attorney, Gary Preble. Ingram knew Preble because they were both active in the Republican Party and because they were both born-again Christians.
Paul, do you want to start where we left off? You want to go back to that room and get that picture in your mind?
Is Julie still tied up, Paul?
She's just kind of laying there. I don't think she is.
Why is she tied up to begin with?
Does the idea to do this come up during a card game, or what?
Did you ever play for anything besides money?
I don't know. Pushing me, tell me we got to do it. Jim and Ray, I think, are pushing me, tell me we got to do it. We made a bet.
Are you being threatened?
I think Jim's got a gun. I can't believe it. He's got it pointed at me.
Is it loaded?
I don't know. I don't know. I think he said I've got to go through with it.
Is he serious?
I think so.
There were poker games back in the mid-70s, and it included not only a good share of the sheriff's office, but people from the State Patrol, the Olympia Police, Lacey Police, and friends in the area. I can think of probably 30 to 35 houses that these were held in, and it wasn't on a constant basis. It was very infrequent. It might have been once in a month, and it might have been because they got together 3 times in a month. The only real consistency on it was that the current undersheriff, Neil McClanahan, the current chief criminal deputy, Ramey Hansen, and the current lieutenant of detectives, Tom Lynch, were the instigators of most of the poker games. They were the ones that were at the majority of the games. Because of I worked either swing shift or graveyard through that time, a lot of times I wasn't available, so I was not there.
The poker games ended about 1978. Anything that had happened there could not lead to charges. So now Detectives Schoening and Vukic were instructed to go back to Ingram and find out if Jim Raby and the other men were involved in the abuse during the past 7 years, the time that fell within the statute of limitations for sex crimes.
We got to get back to Julie, Paul. That's what we got to do. We got to establish some time.
Give me some information. Julie said the one time she could recall she was 7th or 8th grade.
No, that's the time she's having a problem recalling a time then. What she says is she remembers for sure the time when she's 4 or 5 and again when she's 6, and then she has some skipped periods where she's having problems remembering. Is she
having as much hard pulling this out as I am?
Worse, Paul. I think she has a deeper fear than you, that's why. But we've got to get some time parameters, Paul, to help us go further with them, to get them out of the picture of fear for her.
7 years ago was 1981. She was 11. She was in the 5th grade. It was just before Christmas.
81.
So it's your 4th Christmas there.
81. Trying to get a picture of Christmas of 1981. Oh, I'm at the house on Fir Tree. Where I had a white station wagon, Mercury, gray Toyota. I don't know why I should see snow, but I think I see snow. I see snow.
What year is the Mercury station wagon?
That's 79. That's a county car. My dump trucks there. I had a dump truck then. Dump trucks there. It's cold. At least I think it's cold. I think I see snow. I think I see Ray. 81. Had a beard. Black Ford truck.
Ingram had near total recall of every car driven by his family or friends. By visualizing the vehicles, he could establish approximate dates for his scenes.
A 76 Ford truck, nice looking mags, all that good stuff. Okay, I'm outside. I see Ray.
How about Jim Raby? You said the car was
brown or yellow.
Is this a county car?
I think it's a brown or a bronze aspen. Don't know if that fits or not. Jim's working that day. He's got his badge and his gun. He's got a jacket. Come on, Lord. Give me a picture here.
Why is he and Ray at your house?
I don't know yet.
Wait, can we look into the house and see what you see?
Go inside. Nobody's there.
There a Christmas tree in the house?
Yes. As we walked in, there's a Christmas tree in the corner of the dining room. We have a brown table, dining room table, plaid, the orange couches.
Look at the calendar, Paul. There's got to be a calendar in there.
1981. I see the year.
What day is it?
December 23rd. That comes to me December 23rd, no other time.
1981.
We go upstairs. I don't think we even talk in the house.
Before you go upstairs, look at the clock. What time is it?
5 to 3 or quarter after 11. 5 to 3. Don't know where the clock's at, but I can see it. We go upstairs. Julie's sitting on her floor doing homework. She's scared. The windows are open. The bunk bed is against the window, so the top bunk looks right out the window. Julie's pushed maybe onto the bed, and we would take her clothes off. We take all
what was she studying?
Clothes off.
What grade is she in?
Just one thing at a time. The big thick book, like maybe junior higher.
It says something in that book. What's it say in the book?
Maybe it's English. It's got a lot of writing. Maybe numbers. Maybe it's math. It's open like this on the floor. I think I see division.
Okay, now Julie's got her clothes off. Let's look at Julie again. How is she built? What's her maturity?
She's tied, hands tied to the bedpost. Pretty well developed. Pubic hair, feet tied too. Jim's on her. He's on the bed. She's squirming. He doesn't put much of his weight on her, but and he's not in her very far. He's kind of playing with her maybe. Jim gets off. Ray goes over. He goes on.
What is Ray doing to her?
There's a bunk bed, and he's pretty big. Having trouble fitting in, and he just makes love to her, has intercourse, I should say. Says everything will be all right, and gets up, puts his clothes on. They leave.
Does Julie say anything to him when he gets off? Gets done.
She's just crying. I go over and untie her and hug her and tell her how sorry I am. Clean her up. She just cries, doesn't say anything to me.
Can you go back and look again at that calendar and make sure that the calendar you see is right?
I don't see a calendar. I see December 23rd, 1981.
By chance, that very same evening, Jim Raby walked into the sheriff's department to return a slide projector he had borrowed for some Kiwanis meetings.
The sergeant and detectives happened to walk across the hall and see me and looked very startled and asked me what I was doing. I said I was bringing back a projector. They were working in the office that I had as my office prior to my retirement, and in there was Detective Schoening and Vukic. Stupidly on my part, I knew that a person accused of molesting their children normally has a safe to be at large evaluation, and then is released as long as they have a place to go, a place to stay. And not very often can they return back to the family home, at least until something's resolved. And my wife and I had discussed allowing Paul to stay in our travel trailer if he needed a place. And so my question was he being cooperative? Then they asked me to sit down and discuss it, and mentioned that I was named as a suspect. And being extremely naive, I guess, and I shouldn't have maybe have been that naive, being a cop as long as I had been. But these were associates that I had worked with on a daily basis, and I trusted what they were telling me was the truth. And that if my name had come into it, I didn't know how it had come in, but I didn't think they were lying to me. And I just assumed that they had been told something that they needed to check out. And so I was willing to talk to them, because I had no memory of this. And they kept telling me that the memory should come back. And I said, I did not believe that I could block this type of thing out of my mind. They were talking to me, basing it on poker games back in the mid-70s. And my comment to them was, well, if they are considering putting me in custody, it has to be something a little more recent than that, because that was past the statute of limitations.
That same evening, deputies went to Ray Rish's home and took him into custody. The arrests were front-page news the next day, and the next day, and the next day. There were several things that you were quoted in the Olympian as saying. One of the quotes was something to the effect of, "I must have a dark side."
That is something that makes me very angry. That is not something that was even in my language at that time. I wouldn't have known what a dark side meant. The day of my interview, prior to my interview, Paul Ingram, in his taped interview, states that he must have a dark side. I never mentioned that. I never said it. It was not something that would even have crossed my mind.
Now, another quote had you saying something that I must be dangerous to be at large, you better lock me up and throw away the key.
That I did say. I came down to a point where I was saying that if I can do this and block it out of my mind and not remember any of it, then I must be completely out of my mind, and you better lock me up and throw away the key. And that is very definitely what I said, because that was the feeling that I had.
Hendrik Lauer is pastor of the Gull Harbor Lutheran Church and an outspoken critic of how this investigation was handled.
My involvement in this particular situation happened practically from the very beginning, because as soon as Jim had been arrested, Ruth called me and asked me to go see Jim. Well, when I called the Thurston County Jail, they wouldn't even tell me where Jim was. I got nothing but a runaround from them, and it wasn't until he was transferred to the Mason County Jail in Shelton that I was able to see him, and I certainly would like to commend the staff of that institution. They were very professional, very helpful. I can say nothing but good about them, quite in contradistinction to my experience with our local one. And of course, that hit me out of the blue just like it hit Jim out of the blue. And I really didn't know what to think or what to do at the very outset, but I went to see him. And then it very quickly became plain what really had happened.
When we were arrested, it was based on, supposedly, a rape of Julie on December 23rd, 1981. In this, they put Paul into his translate statements, and he looks outside and there's snow on the ground. He sees his dump truck. He sold his dump truck in 82, so it had to be 81. They tell him there's a calendar on the wall. He looks at the calendar. Oh, it's December of 81. They say, there's a clock on the wall. What time is it? He says, oh, it's 3:15. There's a Christmas tree in the corner. They go into real elaborate nailing down that day. So Ray and I are arrested based on that incident. A day later, my wife, going through some of our receipts, happens to have, and why we had it, I don't know. I just bless the Lord that there's a lot of things in this that I was protected. And in there was a receipt for us at a motel in Cranbrook, BC, that we had checked in at 10:10 p.m. December 23rd, 1981. Which at that point they should have said something's wrong here and backed off, probably released us and said we've got to go further into this. But instead they go back to Paul and they say, Paul, something's wrong with that date.
The detectives told Ingram that Raby and Risch might get out unless he could remember another episode more recent than 1981. Ingram came up with several scenes, including this one.
He said he wanted Chad.
What did he mean by that?
He wanted to have sex sexually.
Were you at that point, you yourself threatened?
He had his gun on, but I don't know if he had it out. He pushed me with his right hand. Chad was on the bed, cowering. He went over and ripped his pants off and made him kneel on the floor, and I was powerless to do anything. I couldn't help him. Oh, dear Jesus. Oh,
it's okay, Paul. It's got to come out.
I'm sorry. How could I do it? How could I do it? Oh, Jesus.
Paul, you're asking yourself a question. You said, why did I do that? Tell me, why did you do that? Why did you let that happen, Paul?
Jim had some control over me. Jim had threatened me with a gun before. He told me he'd kill me. He had control. I'd do anything that he wanted me to do. He could make me do anything.
The same afternoon, detectives asked Paul's son Chad about this incident. Chad insisted that he had no memory of it. Once again, the detectives enlisted the help of Richard Peterson, the psychologist who'd been so successful at breaking through Paul Ingram's supposed barrier of denial. After an intense session with Richard Peterson, Chad thought he recalled the abuse. The record of statements made by members of the Ingram family between November 1988 and May 1989 is full of contradictions. And yet, I think that everyone in the Ingram family sincerely believed at the time that they were struggling to retrieve true memories. The shattered family found their only source of comfort in their religion. At the Church of Living Water, they had been taught that human nature is sinful, but that if we repent and submit to the will of God, He will guide us. God will directly reveal the truth to those who place themselves in readiness to hear Him.
At that point, I was reading the Bible. I was praying. You know, I believe in speaking in tongues, and I was doing those things. And Pastor Brayton kept saying, you know, there's a scripture in Luke that says that God won't give you a scorpion if you ask for a loaf of bread, or a brick, if you know, or a snake, or anything else. He'll give you what you ask for. And so I thought that I'm asking for the truth. I'm seeking the truth. I'm going. I've got Pastor Brayton. I've got a Christian attorney. I've got a Christian psychologist, and these people are all telling me that what I'm doing is right.
The Christian psychologist was Bill Lennon. Ingram had asked to see a psychologist, hoping to get some help recovering what he thought were memories trapped in his unconscious mind. Dr. Lennon made his own tape of the session and held it until recently, when Ingram's attorneys got hold of it.
And I can't, when I see it, I see myself as being an unwilling participant in all this. One of the persons had a gun, and I kept seeing a person behind me, or feeling a person behind me, but I couldn't bring that person out. First of all, I visualized that my unconscious mind is open, and I can get anything out of there that I want to. And it's like you turned on a light in the storeroom, okay? The other thing I've done is I've tried to take Jesus, and when I go into the situation, to take Him in there with me, so that if there's something that I can't see, and they don't like me to use these terms, but I ask Him to show me a face, or to let me hear, or to let me see, and that's helped. But I'm still, just really struggling to get information out.
Ingram was troubled because he had not yet produced any memories which were consistent with his daughter's descriptions of how he himself had molested them, and he could not explain how Jim Raby had gained control over his family. Some strange power seemed to prevent them from resisting or even remembering the abuse carried out by the three other men.
Somehow or another, and I think it's through a witchcraft situation, but I'm not sure, in about 1975, the abuse started with 3 other people. Ray Risch and Jim Raby and Gary Edwards were 3 people that I palled around with about this time. Then Ray started having an affair with a woman by the name of Dana, and Dana was one of these free thinkers. Dana also wore a ring in the shape of a serpent, a snake, a silver snake ring on one hand. My mind tells me that for some reason that I was targeted and that I was vulnerable, and there was some kind of a ritual. There may have been, I think it was a cat, but I also see a doll, and my pastor said it could have even been a baby, that there was a sacrifice of some kind, and the reward, if you will call it that, was sex with Dana. She was a very appealing woman, and to me at that time that may have been something I was looking for. I can, and I don't know how to say this, to say it right.
Just say it any way you want to say it.
Okay, well I can visualize myself going through this sacrifice. I have to be careful. One of the questions I always ask myself is, how much of this is imagination or how much of it is really true? So I'm believing that this is true, that I'm not putting my imagination in. They have a get-together. I believe that they have fiddle music going, and I believe there may have been a little bit of dancing, like hillbilly type music and that kind of thing. I can see maybe Dana dancing in a blue denim outfit of some kind, short skirt, that kind of thing. And then there's a ritual. And I'm given a knife and told there's a cat that's kind of spread-eagled and tied down, and I'm supposed to kill this thing. And the way I kill it is I gut it, and then somebody else.
It's alive.
It's alive, and this thing's screaming, or the fiddle's screaming, or something while this all goes on. But I go ahead and do that, and somebody else takes the heart out. They cut it out or whatever, and put it on a knife and give this heart to Dana, and I believe that she actually takes a bite of this thing. I don't like, and I believe that they also cut some of the blood in a cup. But the pastor seems to think it makes a lot of sense with the bondage, and how did 3 or 4 of us get together and abuse my kids? You know, that's just something you don't say, hey, would you like to come over tonight and we'll play with my daughter? Something had to tie us together. And
one of the things that has held some people in bondage, and it's a trick, the whole thing is a trick, but one of the things, not that there aren't children that aren't sacrificed, there are. One of the things that has held people in bondage is to put people beyond their sensibilities with an overload of ritual and an overload of sexuality, and stretch them not so far beyond that they quit, but beyond what they can handle, and they're swimming, in a sense, in their emotions. And then to make a move, for instance, to sacrifice the cat, and then simulate the same thing with the baby, and not necessarily use a baby child, but use a doll, but work it in such a way that they've got you trapped and got you in bondage because you think, my gosh, what if I did that to a child, which moves to, I did that to a child, which moves to, I have committed this murder, and therefore I must stay within this secret group.
Right.
I want you to have some sense that, he knows a little bit about this stuff. He heard some of this stuff before. I think what you're saying to me in a lot of ways is, I'm not going very fast, and I want to go faster, but my system is saying this is about as fast as I can go.
After this, Ingram began an almost monastic existence. Alone in his cell, he prayed, read his Bible, and meditated. He recorded his visions, searched for inconsistencies, and then walked again through the same scenes. The visualization experience was not recorded on audio tape as it had been during the first week. Ingram now went through the memory recovery process on his own, or with the help of his pastor, John Brayton. Later, he narrated the scenarios to the detectives. Do you remember the episode that Ingram described as occurring on December 23, 1981? That was the date that Jim Raby could prove he had been in Canada. Ingram now moved that episode to the spring of 1984.
Yeah, the reason I know it was 1984 is there were some campaign signs. I was running for the legislature. And there were some campaign signs outside the shed
Well, we've talked about this before. I know you've mentioned the campaign signs. Do you have any better recollection as to whether or not the campaign was over or whether or not the primary had been held?
No, this would have been in the spring, as I recall it. In fact, school may have been in session because when we went upstairs, Julie was reading a book, maybe a math book. She had to open about the middle.
Well, what happened to the snow and the Christmas tree?
The date of December of 1981 was brought up, and I had thought there was snow on the ground and that Julie was involved in a bondage situation. There's a Christmas tree by the sliding glass door in the dining room with presents under it. I even recall perhaps looking at a calendar as we went up that said December, and then because in 1981 she would have only been 11 years old, and because of the development of her, I thought that was the same situation that happened in 1984. Another thing that I had noticed was that the roof of the van, we had that blue Plymouth van, was rusting fairly well by then.
This is what helps you realize this was December of '83.
Right. It would have, as I recall, been before the situations went through the campaign, before all those.
In his mind, Ingram revisited each scene, always as an observer, always watching helplessly as Jim Raby, Ray Risch, and others raped his wife, his 2 daughters, and his 2 older sons.
And Julie did cry out in pain, and at one point Jim put his hand over her mouth to stop her screaming and crying. She did say, "Daddy, Daddy, they're hurting me." She asked me to help them. Her eyes were closed.
What did you do, Paul? How did you react to that?
I just stood there. I don't recall.
By this time, Erica Ingram had begun to tell a much different story, one which she would repeat 2 years later on the Sally Jesse Raphael show.
Erica, you say that you were raped and tortured by your father and his friends for 17 years. Explain to us what really did happen over these 17 years. In other words, tell me about father and what he did and mother, and go back and explain it to us.
Okay, it started with my dad, and the first memory I have was when I was 5, and he would come into my room at night, and he would abuse me, he would rape me, and do mean things to me, and he was always very violent, and at the end he got more violent. And also they started a satanic cult when I was 5.
Who did?
My parents. And
they started one?
Right, and there was probably about 30 people involved at that time.
Who were the 30? You don't have to give their names, I just mean what kind of people?
They were people in the community, like policemen, a lot of policemen, because my dad worked for the sheriff department, and he was the top, second to the top of the criminal deputies, or chief civil deputy. Then there were some judges, doctors, lawyers, different people throughout the community that had high political standings, and then just people that they would bring in.
All right, and they started a satanic cult, and this is in the state of Washington?
Right.
What city?
Olympia.
Olympia, okay. And what happened at the rituals? I know it must be pretty awful, but what happened?
First, they would start with just like chanting, and they would all be in a circle, and there'd be people of the, like a middle circle, and then people on the outside, and they would start chanting, and then they would either kill an animal, sometimes they would kill a baby.
A baby? Where would they get babies?
Sometimes people in the cult would have them just for this, and then sometimes they would take people's babies, or I don't know where they got them, but they had them. And then they would just like have sex with a group of people. Sometimes they would put someone on this like table, and everybody would have sex with that person.
Did this happen to you?
Yeah.
You remember being on a table and people having sex with you? Wow. What else?
And sometimes they would like have, they would drink blood, and they would pour blood on people. And one time when I was 16, they gave me an abortion. I was 5 months pregnant. And the baby was still alive when they took it out. And They put it on top of me, and then they cut it up. And then when it was dead, then people in the group ate parts of it.
One thing that I'll comment on that I think is really important for people to understand, the satanic information was baffling to everybody for a while, and it was to me. Mrs. Ingram was the first person that I physically sat across the table from, like I'm sitting across from you, that started that kind of babbling and information. And I have never seen anything like that before, and I recognized her to be in some sort of a trance or self-induced hypnosis or something. I mean, I don't know what it was, but that's what it looked like, because you could see by looking at her that her mind was in a different place than the room we were in. But I'd known her from before. I didn't know her very well, but she seemed like a real reasonable, normal, average person. And it threw a lot of question marks at everybody, and I think in fairness to both sides, and the police too, even though we complained about it a lot later, no one really had seen this kind of thing before around here. No one really knew if it was fact or fiction. That's why we called time out for the trial the first time around. And it was in one of those hearings that Mrs. Ingram testified under oath about some satanic meeting and blood running up Mr. Raby's arm and all the craziness that we heard. And I don't know if she truly believed it or how that came to be, but she never really seemed like a liar. I mean, she just seemed like a normal, decent person, but she'd tell these outrageous stories that couldn't have happened. She got them from somewhere.
During the 1980s, reports by people who identified themselves as survivors of satanic cults began to circulate around the country. These intergenerational cults supposedly tortured children and bred babies for the purpose of sacrifice.
Every so often they'd come and just take the covering off and just stand at the top of this pit and taunt me, "Where's your God now?" And they threw human flesh, baby flesh down, and that's what I was to survive on, if I was to survive.
They made it to be like it was a great privilege to eat the bodies. I mean, the girl that I had to kill, they treated me like I was being given a great gift when they gave me a part of her body that I had to eat.
Baby killings, ritualistic rape, cannibalism. It seems like the stuff of supermarket tabloids or trash TV. We could dismiss all of this easily, except for so many similar stories told by so many survivors. The reality of Satanism is even more believable when you talk to reputable therapists like those here at Columbine Hospital in Denver, Colorado. They believe the survivors are telling the truth. Linda Young is a psychiatric nurse who works with adult survivors of satanic cults. Her goal is to help them move beyond the trauma of their experiences into healthy, happy lives.
Most of these people come to us thinking what's happened to them isn't true. They don't want it to be true, so they go back and forth. We call it the true, not true experience. When they're in a memory, they know it's true, and then they let the emotion out, and it's very true, and then the emotion goes away, and they say, oh, maybe it didn't happen. So that letting the world know that it's true, many of them know that that will never happen, or it's a very good possibility in our lifetime that most people will not ever begin to believe that this is really going on.
No physical proof of satanic ritual abuse has ever been found, and police are now highly skeptical of such reports. But at that time, they needed to be taken seriously. Aware that the case here could be of national significance, Neil McClanahan approached the Thurston County Commissioners to ask for funds to expand the investigation.
Ours is the first one to substantiate the fact that an offender has talked and has confirmed the things that have taken place that until this time have never been confirmed.
Well, yes and no. Erica and Sandy Ingram had probably seen the book, Satan's Underground. Their tales of satanic ritual conformed to others which were circulating at that time. Paul Ingram apparently hadn't read the book or heard those stories, and so when he was prompted to recall satanic rituals, he visualized something quite different.
There's a campfire with about 15 people, and I say 15, and that 15 may include Ray and Gary and I, but there's a group of people there in white robes, and Dana has a white satin type robe, and it's very plain, and I think it's made plain to me that Dana has no clothing on underneath this robe. She comes over to where we are and says that they're going to have a ceremony, and we're to be there in some kind of an induction like an apprentice. Well, I've already had some beer, and I don't think it's really for real. I think it's kind of a game, and I go along with it. So each of us go through this individually, and then, and I'm not sure who does it, but I don't think it's Dana. I recall getting my thumb pricked with a little device like you draw blood with, and when the blood's dripped onto this parchment, I'll call it, then the thumb is pressed into that. We all do that, and I can't read it, but we each do a certificate. And now they put a white robe on us, and they're open in the back. They're like knee-length hospital gowns, and somebody ties them on the back. I recall one of the women ties mine on, one of the women from the group. And while this is all going on, everybody's drinking beer. It's bottles that's taken from cases that are set there. I don't recall any ice or anything. Dana goes on with the ritual, and there's two men that come forward with the same robes on, and as I recall, they're novices.
Did you recognize these people?
I don't recognize these people, and I don't recognize anybody else that's there. But these men have killed an animal that I believe was a goat, and my recollection is it's some kind of a ritualistic killing, that they killed this animal and butchered it, and they have a silver or a stainless steel bowl that has chunks of meat in it, maybe an inch square, and they brought these chunks of meat, and what's done with those is they're offered somehow or another. Then everybody takes sticks like you'd roast marshmallows and sticks the meat on the stick and then roasts them over this fire, and 4 or 5 or 6 people at a time will do this, and they'll roast the meat and then eat a piece of it. Dana had the women come forward, and she paired the men off with the women. There were more women than there were men. But Gary and Ray and Jim each got a woman.
How about you? What did you participate in?
Everybody got out of their gowns and had undressed. I went with Dana. She had me lie on a blanket. Then, when I was done with her, I had a beer, and there was a woman there about 20, and there was at least one man with her, and when I was done, I had sex with her.
Was your mother involved?
Yes.
Was your father the head of this group?
Yes. I couldn't really do a lot about it. I would go to the police. The police dropped charges on 2 of the men that we pressed charges on. When I told them, about the other people that were involved, they didn't do anything. When I told them about the murder, they didn't do anything.
Because the police don't want to get other police in trouble.
Well, because it was most of the department.
Now, your father pleaded guilty, said he did these things, and he's in jail for 20 years, and he's been in for 3.
Right.
Is that correct?
I need to point out that Erica Ingram's statements during her appearance on the Sally Jesse Raphael show in December of 1991 goes somewhat beyond any allegations she made while the case was being investigated here in 1989, but it's contributed to an impression that Paul Ingram confessed to abusing his daughters during rituals. The crimes imagined by Ingram were no less terrible. He believed that his family had been ensnared by satanic powers which made them helpless to resist or even remember vicious attacks contrived and carried out by Jim Raby and Ray Risch.
When they were done tormenting her, Jim raped her vaginally on the floor, and then Ray raped her vaginally. When they were done, they both got dressed. Julie was crying. She moved over by the bed and pulled a blanket or a sheet down over her. And then we went back downstairs, and when we got outside, it's like we're back to normal again. We talked about the campaign. Ray had come in his white Chevy truck, but I don't recall any campaign signs on it.
The investigators seemed to believe Ingram's stories, but they couldn't understand how the cult controlled the Ingram family. Above all, how did they control their memories? so that an episode of sadistic abuse was forgotten at the same moment that normal memory returned, and Jim Raby became once again Ingram's campaign manager, and Ray Risch became a friend who helped Ingram work on the family's vehicles. The detectives searched for an expert, someone who had studied how cults controlled their members. They found Dr. Richard Offshee, professor of social psychology at the University of California.
The more stuff they got from Erica and Julie, and the more stuff they got from Paul, the more bizarre and improbable and mostly uncorroborated everything turned out to be. And they simply didn't know where to go because Erica was claiming that she knew everything about what had happened to her and essentially knew all the people involved and so on, but wouldn't tell them. And Julie would have also been in a position to know who was involved, but also wouldn't tell anyone. And everything that they had come up with, they had said, turned out not to prove out. Where there should have been objective evidence, there really wasn't. Let's go back to that first day and your being in here. Now, was it that day that you admitted to abusing Erica during the week right before she moved out?
I admitted to abusing both Julie and Erica. They told me that both the girls said that they'd been abused within the week that they moved out. With a little bit of information, and I just pictured myself as what I would do in a sexual situation, of what I would do with them, and that's the way I described it, and I tried to hang on to that. Those two scenes have never been very real to me at all. If I look at the statement, I can imagine myself there, but it's hard for me to see anything really happening unless I make it happen in my memory. I don't know if that's a good description or not.
And what about the involvement of Raby and Risch and Edwards?
Well, as I recall, the girls had told the detective that somebody else was involved, and they would not give them, or I don't think they'd give them any names, and so we kind of went through a rundown of who I had been involved with. When I went into the scene, I had Jim there. I could see Jim, and then Ray and Gary came as we got into this.
When you use the phrase, when you went into the scene, what do you mean by that?
Well, I sat here and went into my memory, and they asked me questions. I think I had the two of you and Dr. Peterson, and they just kind of, I'll say bombarded with the questions, and that kind of got me going, and I was able to get some things out.
Peterson takes part in the interrogation, and Peterson does a relaxation exercise with Paul, tells him to relax, and the next thing you know, Paul does that and now starts visualizing what the interrogators had been telling him for 2 days were things that happened. Visualization is not memory. Visualization is just creating an image in one's mind's eye. Although if one is in trance, and that's probably the state that Paul was in, these visualizations are very powerful and compelling experiences. And Paul demonstrates what's called trance-logic and hypersuggestibility after he engages in the relaxation exercise. He also visualizes essentially anything that the interrogators suggest to him is going on. And at one point they wanted to know what time it was, so they told him to find a wristwatch. And he located a wristwatch on someone's hand and read the time supposedly on a wristwatch 17 years earlier. This has nothing to do with human memory. This is all imagination.
If I go in, if I see a scene in the middle and start through it, sometimes it's hard to get the beginning, but I get a pretty good scene, and sometimes the picture is fairly clear. I can't get the beginning. I can get the middle to what appears to be the end. So I kind of question when I get a whole complete picture and it looks complete. I begin to wonder if my imagination's
It was just absurd, and But that started the ball rolling, and then subsequent to that, Paul started developing self-hypnosis relaxation procedures and continued to develop these quite impossible and unprovable visualizations.
The Lord's preparing me that when I see this, there's going to be so much garbage there that He that I'm going to be ready for it when I see it, that I can handle whatever it is that I'm going to see. I believe the memory's there. It's just, how do we get it out, And I just spend the whole day either praying or going through these scenes.
As Ingram describes his process to Dr. Offshee, he sounds cheerful and confident. The emotional distress we heard in his voice during the first week is gone. Paul Ingram is on the team now, gathering evidence for the prosecution. He's back where he belongs, doing his job as a police officer, and possibly even carrying out a mission from God.
From that point until May of 1989, there was continuing burgeoning of crazy stories, satanic events, cult incidents, and actually sometimes Mr. Cordes and I would hear this before the police. We'd be interviewing Paul, or we'd be interviewing one of the people, and they'd tell the story for the first time. Nobody'd heard it. It became kind of a race to run out to see if we could find people, because they would name real people in our community and see if there was any corroboration of any of this. And of course there never was. And then the police would get stories that we wouldn't know about, and they'd be out with their bulldozer digging up yards and trying to find evidence.
At that time I was Chief Deputy Coroner for Thurston County, and in that capacity I was obliged to assist the Sheriff's Office, and as any other people in that function, in any way I could. And they just asked me to, hey, come on out here, and we want you to do an examination of some property. Essentially, this was calling on my expertise, not as a forensic scientist so much as an archaeologist. But they brought one of their bigger pieces of equipment out there with a blade, and they've indicated an area that had been indicated to them by the witnesses against Paul Ingram as an area in which burials had taken place. Burials specifically, the remnants of victims of ritual sacrifice, and animals that had been sacrificed, and of course the recurrent theme of babies that had been sacrificed. And they buried them out back, they said, out back of the house and in the field nearby. So I proceeded under the assumption that the only way to do it was to clear a sizable area, to not leave out anything that would have been was included in the accuser's description of where it had been buried. Now, so we took the pasture out back and literally took the top off of it. The object in this was to cut off, without disturbing the underneath soils, cut off all of the sod and the roots of the grasses, which are contained within the first 3 or 4 inches of what you generally call the topsoil. In such a situation, any hole that is dug with a post hole digger or a shovel or what have you, down through that surface, becomes mixed with other dirts. Even if you don't mix it, it becomes so aerated in the process of throwing it up out of there that the microorganisms multiply and the soil changes character completely. It becomes a disturbed soil. And as such, it takes on a very distinct, different color from the parent material from which it was derived. It gets mixed with topsoil, it gets mixed with roots, it gets all kinds of junk in it by mistake. And then when you fill the hole back up and stamp it down, here's the circular outline, a light field of clays with this nice dark hole in the middle of it. And to any archaeologist, that's a pit. I found one bone. I believe I identified it as an elk toe bone, and then it was in a, not a pit form, it was in a slot, a long, narrow, trough-like depression in the subsod that looked very much like a dog had dug it out, put it in there, and then scooped the dirt back in. I said, look, there wasn't any evidence. Not a matter of I did 4 or 5 of these supposed cult killing scenes and whatnot in the course of my tenure with the county. Some of them here, some of them in Mason County around. But I've been to different sites to locate bodies where they were buried by the cultists when one of them came forward and said that he'd been involved in all this. On no occasion have I ever found any evidence for what they say. None at all. And in this, my experience is directly comparable to that of the 250 or so cases that the FBI has responded to. Nobody ever finds anything. I talked to Neil, who was a good friend of mine, and I went to Neil McClanahan after I got back, and I said, Neil, there's nothing out there. There was nothing there, Neil. Nothing. And he said to me, if you were the devil, would you leave any evidence? And my hair stood on end, and I realized at that point there was no talking to him beyond then. And I excused myself and I said, my report, I handed that to somebody, and I'm out of here. I have nothing else to add.
No physical evidence of any kind was ever found. The only evidence was the terrible emotional trauma displayed by the victims. Under Sheriff Neil McClanahan and the other detectives in this case were deeply affected by their apparent suffering. Let's take a few minutes and talk about the victims, or accusers in this case. They are all the adult members of the Ingram family, except the oldest, Paul Jr., who no longer lived in the Olympia area. The youngest son, Mark, who was 9 years old, was not drawn into the investigation. The disclosures by Erica and Julie Ingram, and later by Paul's son Chad and his wife Sandy Ingram, evolved gradually. They followed a pattern which some would describe as typical for the recovery of repressed memories. Others would describe the pattern as typical of false memory syndrome. There is sharp disagreement about how to distinguish recovered memories from false memories. In this case, I think it's likely that the whole Ingram family was generating false memories. They were all being exposed to the same theories and persuasions. We know how these influences affected Paul Ingram because his sessions were recorded. The rest of the Ingram family was protected by confidentiality, so my theory on how this may have started is based on limited information. In August of 1988, Erica attended a conference conducted for young women by the Church of Living Water. As others talked about being victimized by sexual abuse, she was overcome by emotion and began sobbing. It may have been more of a feeling than a memory. Pain, anger, a sense of physical violation. She felt as if she had been sexually abused. As she was growing up, Erica experienced menstrual problems. In one of the earliest disclosures that is part of the record of this case, Erica described something that occurred when she was in the 4th grade. She doesn't recall seeing anyone, but she recalls waking up and hurting all over. She recalls talking to her mother about the starting of her period at this time. In the summer of 1987, while Erica was traveling in California, she experienced such severe pain that she went to an emergency room. The doctor there told her she had a sexually transmitted disease. Back in Olympia at Group Health, her condition was diagnosed as an ovarian cyst. This was surgically removed in December of 1987. The pelvic exams, the invasion of her body, the pain, the fact that it was a female problem that would not be discussed openly by her family, all that could have contributed to post-traumatic stress, which erupted in reaction to a description of sexual abuse. In the 2 months that elapsed between the disclosure at the church conference and Erica's contact with the sheriff's office, she may have followed the methodology suggested in this book, The Courage to Heal. The book describes how the recovery of repressed memories takes place gradually, sometimes beginning with a vague feeling of having been abused. What Erica told her mother was that sometimes after she was asleep, her father would come into the girl's bedroom where Erica slept in the top bunk. He touched her with his hands and hurt her by putting his fingers into her vagina. This was also the first thing she told the authorities. What about Julie? After Erica's disclosure at the church retreat, Julie was told that she too must have been abused. Possibly she was guided back to her earliest memories, to the age of 4 or 5, to a time when the house was full of men keeping her awake with their loud talking and laughing. She could feel the fear, and vague images came into her mind. The Courage to Heal advises its readers to trust these feelings and to believe that they must have been molested, even if they have no clear memories. Information conveyed among family members by Pastor Brayton and the detectives also influenced the gradual evolution of disclosures by the Ingram family. The daughters had begun to say that their mother participated in the abuse. When this information got back to Paul, he came up with a scene in which his wife was threatened.
She kind of said hi as she came up, and then when she saw what was happening, came into the room, and she threatened us all, and Jim Raby grabbed her by the hair. He says, if you tell anyone that we'll kill your kids. He said, even if we get arrested, when we get out, or we'll have somebody else kill them. That's the gist of what he said to her, and then they left.
When Sandy continued to insist that she remembered nothing, she was told that she was in denial. If she couldn't prove she had been a victim, she might face criminal charges for aiding in the abuse of her daughters. Helped by Pastor Brayton, Mrs. Ingram finally remembered a vicious rape by Jim Raby and Ray Risch. Erica, at an interview with detectives on February 7th, said that her mother inserted a wooden closet pole into her vagina. This occurred, she said, in September of 1988, just before she moved out of the family home. If this were true, it would have been only 2 months prior to the time that Erica met with her mother to tell her she was being molested. A lot of harm has been done in this case by unproven psychological theories, but there is a well-established psychological theory that helps explain what happened here. That is the theory of cognitive dissonance. The theory states that when a person is confronted with two items of information which seem to be true but which contradict each other, the person is likely to use some twisted logic to reconcile those beliefs. When Ingram was told that he had sexually abused his daughters, his family, his pastor, and his co-workers all were telling him that this happened. It took very little persuasion to convince him that he must have done it, but forgotten it. With each new piece of information, everyone involved did their best to reconcile it with their own understanding. Little by little, a shared belief system was constructed by the Ingram family, the pastors of their church, and the detectives.
If Sachs or I had asked you in 1984, while you and Jim were having lunch at work, whether Jim Raby controlled you, what would you have said then?
I would have said no.
Did you not know that you were or had been controlled by Raby until you got arrested?
I'm not a psychologist, but a psychologist would probably tell you that I lived in two worlds. I lived in a conscious world and in an unconscious world. My conscious mind would have had, I don't know that I want to say no knowledge of it, but the world, the conscious world that I lived in, did not acknowledge that. And I don't know, like I said, I'm not a psychologist, but my unconscious memory obviously knew.
Social psychologist Dr. Richard Offshee had become known as one of the nation's foremost experts on the tactics of coercion, having investigated everything from Chinese communist brainwashing techniques to the recruitment methods of political and religious movements. Now he turned in his report saying there was no known mechanism for the sort of unconscious control that Ingram was describing.
Well, what the report said was that Paul Ingram's confessions are, in my judgment, the product of the influence techniques that were used on him during the interrogation. Both Erica and Julie are just not credible witnesses. There's a great danger that there's going to be a miscarriage of justice if this is taken to trial, and particularly here I had in mind the upcoming trials of Raby and Risch, in which I think they stood a reasonable chance of being convicted out of just hysteria.
They would not look at the evidence that was coming in using the ordinary standards that police all over the country use in evaluating evidence in a case. The lack of physical evidence, the lack of confirmation.
Is there any physical evidence that this happened to Erica?
To the best of my knowledge, there is none. What are you saying?
I've been in the hospital because of it. I had to go to the hospital many times. I spent most of my life in the hospital. And that is true. And I have scars. And, I mean, doctors were just like looking at my body just going,
If she says that abortions and sexual rituals were performed on her in a female way, would that not be something that a gynecologist could establish?
To the best of my knowledge, the medical evidence does not support the allegation of the kind of physical torture that has been
Is there
alleged.
evidence of an abortion?
Not to my knowledge.
The Ingram family have been covered by Group Health here in Olympia, and their medical records showed nothing unusual. Erica's surgery for the ovarian cyst had left a small scar. Aside from that, doctors who examined both Erica and Julie Ingram found no injuries and no scars.
The report should have been turned over to the defense because it constituted exculpatory evidence. Tabor took the position that it wasn't exculpatory evidence, was not going to turn it over to the defense. So I took a copy of the report and sent it to the presiding judge of the court, saying I was deeply concerned about what was going on.
See, his report was sent to the presiding judge. Presiding judge felt that it was a valid report and gave it to our judge that was hearing the hearings. Our judge also concurred that it was a valid report and ordered the prosecutors to give that report to us.
Under Sheriff McClanahan still held out hope that his department might be the first in the country to expose a satanic cult. Paul Ingram notified them that he had retrieved the information they'd been asking for. He had the names of the other members. One can only speculate how the investigators reacted when they saw the names on that list.
Well, the thing that happened that really made the case fall apart was in the last few days before charges were formally dismissed, Paul Ingram and to some extent Julie Ingram started naming more names of members of the Thurston County Sheriff's Office that were supposedly part of the ritualistic abuse or the satanic activity, or however you want to categorize it. And this was the first time we'd ever heard of, basically, of members presently employed by the department, which would have been in the spring of 1989, in the entire case scenario.
Paul, it's been brought to our attention that somewhere around April 13th of this year, you started giving information to the Thurston County Sheriff's Office about 10 present or former deputies of the Thurston County Sheriff's Office being involved in assaulting your daughter or daughters or your family sexually, okay?
Yes.
The names that I have are Rory Gilliland, Dan McClendon, Doug Jensen, Steve Stocks, Gordon Bennett, Mike Ware, Gary French, Phil Knapp, Ed Littlejohn, and Ralph LaFontaine. And I want to know, I guess to start with, you indicated that in somewhere in 1982, in the spring, I guess, there was some kind of homosexual ring you found out about or were involved in. Would you tell us what that's all about?
There was 2 or 3 in there that were maybe past employees, but the majority of them by far were present employees of the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. And Mr. Cordes and I in particular knew that couldn't be accurate. It was impossible.
What's this, if I can interrupt you, what's this got to do, if anything, with your sexual abuse on your kids, these homosexual encounters you've just described?
As we go through this, I've had there have been some other recollections of these people being involved, at least.
Well, let me just ask you this. Did Rory Gilliland sexually assault anybody in your family besides you?
Mm-hmm.
Who?
As I recall, I got a phone call from Jim, and it was after dinner, so I'm saying around 6:30, saying that Rory would be over in about 30 minutes. I met him outside, and he said something to the effect that I'd like to say hi to Julie. And I said, well, she's upstairs, and we went upstairs.
So why did you let him go up there?
I can't give you a good reason.
Well, Jim calls up and says, hey, Rory wants to come over and have sex with Julie, and so Rory comes over and you say, go ahead, and that's it? Is that what happened?
That's about the way I'm seeing it, and I can't explain why.
Why did Jim call you up? Why didn't Rory call you up?
in all of this, Jim's been a very active player, and I can't give you the reasons yet. Those questions haven't all been answered. A lot of it doesn't make sense yet, but we're getting more every day from memories. So.
Is it all fantasy? Is that why you can't give us any reasons?
That's very clear, very accurate memory.
Why didn't you just say, Rory, you can't have sex with my daughter? Or did you want him to have sex with your daughter?
I don't have a good answer. It's like, I don't know.
That, I think, was the turning point where they knew that the case had fallen apart. And that was the primary single event that I remember that caused the prosecution to say, it's time to stop.
At this point, the people on the investigating team were furious with Paul. Some of them were convinced that he had deliberately misled them, perhaps diverting their attention so that the real leaders had time to destroy evidence and go deeper into hiding. But Paul Ingram also felt betrayed. His former colleagues had never challenged his testimony as he narrated it to them during the past 5 months. He had begun to believe that when they followed his leads and exposed the cult, he, Paul Ingram, would be the hero of the day. Maybe he wouldn't have to serve time in prison. Maybe he'd just get some kind of treatment program.
On Saturday and Sunday, the whole investigative team was working around the clock at the courthouse. My attorney couldn't figure out what was going on. What it was, they were putting intense pressure on Paul Ingram to plead guilty, because they felt as soon as the offshore report came out, that completely killed their case. And they had to have something to show for this $750,000.
Although Ingram knew that what he said in informal sessions could be used against him, he still resisted entering a formal plea of guilty. Why? Because he still had no specific memory of the 6 counts of statutory rape that had been suggested to him as the terms of a plea bargain. 3 episodes with Erica and 3 with Julie, all between July and October of 1988.
Okay, on May 1st, when you made your formal plea of guilty, how was your mental state at that point? What were some of the areas that, how were you thinking then? What were people telling you?
Well, of course, there was a lot of pressure then. Pastor Brayton had told Gary Preble that it was time for me to accept responsibility and to take the plea.
Gary Preble was your attorney at that time? Right. Good.
The prosecutor, of course, was saying that if I didn't do this, they were going to charge me with 200. And the prosecutor, Gary Tabor, and Tom Lynch met with Preble and I about 2 or 3 days before this was all to take place.
Finally, the morning of May 1st, 1989, the day the trial of Jim Raby and Ray Risch was supposed to have begun, he pleaded guilty to the 6 counts of statutory rape.
What happened was we went to Gary Tabor, and maybe Pat Sutherland was involved. I don't remember, but I know he was involved in the final process in the courtroom. And said, this is outrageous to keep prosecuting these people with this kind of false information coming in. And they said that they would dismiss the charges voluntarily, quote, without prejudice, unquote. The stated reasons in open court to the bench from the prosecutor's office were that the charges were being dismissed without prejudice, which means they could pick them up again within the statute of limitations, because the daughters of Paul Ingram were not able to testify. That's not correct. Erica had always been willing to testify, and she told lots of people lots of things in different interviews. She's been on national TV. It's partially correct as it relates to Julie. We'd interviewed Julie several times. Julie would always talk to us about her father or her uncle or her neighbors or lots of people. What she wouldn't talk to us about was Mr. Raby and Mr. Risch.
It really left us up in the air. We, Ray and I, would have been much better off if we'd gone through a trial and had this aired, because the Olympian was allowed access to all the graphic details that we couldn't refute. If we'd have been able to go to trial, we could have blown it out of the water. As it is, the Olympian, as a matter of fact, I had gone down to the Olympian after they dropped charges and tried to give some of our side. And they said, that's old news. And they weren't interested in putting out our side.
Now, you did try to take some further legal action. What was that?
Ray and I sued the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, the prosecutor's office. We also included the pastor from Living Water Church and the psychologist that the sheriff's or prosecutor's office had brought in to assist in the investigation. Basically, it went to the Barbara Rothstein in Seattle, and she threw it out on a couple strong grounds. Number one, that a law enforcement officer is an officer of the court, and therefore, when the law enforcement officer may maliciously lie on the stand and is immune from lawsuit. The second major step was what the sheriff's office did was to Paul Ingram. It was not to Ray and I, and therefore we did not have standing to sue.
Jim, do you have any bitterness towards Paul?
It finally dawned on me, or through some help and discussions, to be forgiven, you have to ask for forgiveness. Paul has written a note to me asking for my forgiveness, and I can forgive him. I can also see that the pressures he went under, and I can see that he has lost more than I have.
So I talked to Paul after and found out more about the techniques that he had been using to self-hypnotize himself, and told him that I did not think that the memories that he anticipated would now come flooding back and he would be able to remember everything that had happened, which is what everyone had been promising him. I told him I didn't think that was going to happen. A couple of months later, or I guess weeks, a month or so later, it just began to fall apart, and Paul began to realize that it wasn't real. It didn't make any sense. It was just some notions that had come into his head that he had thrown his life away because of. But it was too late.
Ingram hired a new attorney who made a motion to withdraw the guilty plea. On January 21st, 1990, the motion came before Judge Robert Peterson, the same Pierce County judge who had conducted previous hearings in this case. The burden of proof was on Paul Ingram to show that his guilty plea had been coerced. All of the witnesses were psychological experts. Richard Peterson was the psychologist who may have unintentionally induced a hypnotic trance while meeting with Ingram on the day after the arrest. Bill Lennon was the Christian family counselor who confirmed to Ingram that he had probably been ensnared by a satanic contract. Both now testified against Ingram, saying that he demonstrated the psychological pathology of a dangerous sex offender. When Ingram's attorneys pointed out the many contradictory statements made by the victims, the prosecution asserted that this revealed the severe psychological damage caused by the abuse. Now, Erica and Julie are your granddaughters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You saw them frequently when they were growing up.
Oh, yes. All of the children. We saw them at least a couple times a year, and then usually we went to the coast. But, I mean, we didn't see any, as far as how the children acted. All girls have tantrums once in a while and want their own way and things like that, but...
Now, you've seen both girls. How recently have you seen?
Well, we saw Julie a year ago this month.
See, Julie went back to Delaware when we were back there. Well, it was a year ago.
It was a year ago this month.
And she went in and saw her father. We had the honor visit. We was all able to go in and have a picnic lunch together. And then we drove around and showed her the beaches of Delaware.
How does Julie seem to be doing?
she seemed to be happy, and
Yeah,
out
she
there
had
on
a
the
lot of
beach,
fun.
she was wading in the water and skipping around and happy-go-lucky.
But she wouldn't talk about what had supposedly happened to you at all?
Well, we've never really questioned her. We've never really questioned.
Paul Ingram's motion to change his guilty plea was denied. In delivering his decision, Judge Robert Peterson stated, "Now there were many interrogations from that time up until May 1st when he pled guilty. Some of those interrogations I don't like. I really don't. But Ingram admitted to molesting his daughters on the first day of his arrest." Now this is before any psychologist has been seen by the defendant. This is before any of the ministers or counselors have been seen by the defendant. And so the brainwashing, the alleged brainwashing by the chaplain and the alleged brainwashing by the psychologist could not possibly have occurred at that time. The case here, he states, is rape of the two women in 1988, and that's all the charges are, and I just find that he did it. Judge Peterson sentenced Ingram to 20 years in prison. Legal appeals of this decision have been unsuccessful.
Paul's elected not to go to the U.S. Supreme Court simply because of the costs and the time that it would take. Paul's only option at this point is going to the governor and asking for a pardon, and that's what he's doing. The goal of my organization has been to get people to call and contact the governor asking for an investigation into this case, because we really believe there was a real great injustice done here. I've had literally thousands of people from around the world, from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, London, people all over the United States have written and faxed and called the governor asking for an investigation into this case.
No one from the sheriff's or prosecutor's office would talk to me on camera, but they did talk to me informally. They insist that Ingram's guilty plea was not coerced. They say that he practically controlled the investigation. Looking at the record of this case, I can agree that Paul Ingram supplied most of the information on which this case was built. Listen again to what Prosecutor Gary Tabor told a Seattle television producer.
Might it be to a person's advantage, if they're accused of a very heinous crime, to try to convolute and confuse the whole issue by telling some way-out things?
At some point, didn't a light go on and people say, God, Paul Ingram is just a gullible person who likes to talk and talk and talk about stuff that may or may not be true?
Well, I suppose, to be fair, one has to say that is a possibility. But there are other possibilities, and that is that Paul Ingram is a deeply disturbed individual. That because he is deeply disturbed, has mental problems that are either manufacturing these things or confusing these real events.
When Tabor acknowledges that Ingram's testimony was untrue, he should also conclude that there was no case at all against Jim Raby and Ray Risch. These two men were entirely innocent. Jim Raby lost his professional career, and Ray Risch's life was turned upside down.
Once I was arrested and thrown in a cell, I lost all my rights as a human being. Most people don't realize that. I mean, at that point, anything you want to say to anybody, you have to say through an attorney who you have to hire, which to me was unbelievable. I've always controlled all my own financial doings, and I lost all that. I had to sign a power of attorney over to my attorney, and through him, do all my finances through him, and my wife had to take care of everything else. Even my customers at my shop couldn't get their cars out. They had to cut the locks off my shop because the sheriff's office refused to give my wife my wallet and my keys for weeks. My hair turned completely white. I got very, 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 very ill, which they refused to do anything about. And it was just totally unreal. I mean, there's no way to describe how you feel.
How is your life different today than it might have been if all of this had never happened?
I'm not really sure. Most people now don't talk about this, don't even remember it, except local people around this area. The only thing I am sure of, financially, this drained a lot. It took a lot of my retirement. I'm still paying $200 a month, and I will be paying $200 a month for years to pay for this. And we're raising kids, so that's money out of our pocket.
It has also probably impacted my income level by hundreds of thousands of dollars. I lost a business over it, a lobbying business where I was supporting law enforcement, and I would have a lot of trouble doing that today. But I do have to say that this case has given me some real strong benefits too. And that's one of the reasons that I've been able to keep my balance and sanity, is looking at the positives. And for one, my marriage is probably bomb-proof at this time. It completely strengthened the bond between my wife and I. And I can't give her enough credit for the strength that she gave me throughout the whole thing.
Jim Raby told me how detectives had interviewed a niece.
But she said, yeah, she'd gone alone with me. She went with me to Yakima. And they said, oh, really? Did you stop anywhere? She said, we stopped twice. It was really, what was that? She said, well, once we had to get gas. The other time we got something to eat. And they said, well, did your uncle do anything to you? She says, he would never do anything to hurt me. And she insisted on telling them that. So I can feel the pain that I've gone through on this, but I try to see the pleasure too. And there has been some very positives come out of this.
In re-examining how this case was handled by the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, we should take into account the fact that they had the best possible motives. Today, we know that no allegation about sex rings or cults supposedly run by people who appear to be law-abiding citizens has ever been verified by evidence. But we couldn't be sure of that if law enforcement officers had not seriously investigated these claims. The Thurston County Prosecutor's Office, on the other hand, has a duty to proceed towards trial only if they are confident that there is enough evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The Prosecutor's Office should publicly acknowledge that the charges against Jim Raby and Ray Risch were unfounded. It's not too late to restore these men to a place of respect in our community.
Yeah, back in June of this year, I went and visited Paul in Delaware, where he's incarcerated. He wants out, obviously. He's making the best of a bad situation. He's revamped the whole correctional system in Delaware, the computer system. There wasn't a computer system when he went there, and he's basically revamped the whole system in Delaware for the correctional facilities throughout the whole state. He goes to all the different prisons and sets up computers. He's taught a lot of the men in the prison how to read. He represents them in different hearings and helps them out. Many of the prisoners that aren't educated, he teaches them how to read, helps them out.
Ingram has written several letters to his church here in Olympia, the Church of Living Water, asking them to meet with representatives of the Ingram organization. He's received no answer, but he remains a devout Christian. He draws comfort from the biblical story of Joseph, who suffered greatly but was eventually reunited with his family.
The Bible says we're never tempted beyond what we're able, and he never gives us anything that we can't face without giving us a way and escape. And so what he did is he said, Joseph, you need to know I have a plan and a destiny for your life, and I'm going to change you into the man that you need to be in order to accomplish that. Look at the things that he was developing in him. You know, through slavery and imprisonment, he became a man of mercy. He also made Joseph an incredibly optimistic man. Now let's think about it. If he was a pessimist, how would he have ever got through anything? Then when he gets falsely accused and he gets thrown in prison, he's been given favor. The Bible says that he had favor with God and with the jailer there. And so he was promoted in that role, and he could say, God, I don't like being in prison, but thank you. I could have been killed for that false accusation, so thank you, Lord, for sparing me and for giving me the opportunity to serve you right here. Did you know that the Lord is more committed to us becoming Christ-like than he is to us being happy? Because everything that is not Christ-like in us is eating us away like a cancer. It's destroying us. And so he's committed to our eternity, to making us like him, because we're not